Danny Savalas, let me turn back to you. How long typically would an appeal process take in a case like this?
Yeah, we can give you the ordinary appeal process for mere mortals who appeal to the appellate division, then up to the Supreme Court. But as with all things Trump, timelines seem to get compressed when it comes to appeals. But then again, at the same time, this is not a case that's dependent on an election, an upcoming election, like, say, Trump's immunity claim, which may need to be resolved in advance of or, in Trump's view, after an election. This is a case that doesn't really need to be fast-tracked when it comes to appeals. And, of course, we're reading this as we go, but it may be the case that in terms of the business organizations, the cancellation of those business licenses, I was just talking about this with Catherine, may not be going forward. Instead, it's going to be referred to the independent monitor, retired Judge Barbara Jones. So the business licenses may not be subject to the death penalty, at least in the way that was contemplated or sought, in a sense, by the Attorney General in this case. You
use the term death penalty. I've heard it a lot with relation to this. Was this judgment, in effect, a death penalty if it's upheld at the appellate level?
It's a death penalty in a sense for people like Alan Weisselberg and other individuals who are banned permanently from doing any kind of business. And you asked that question earlier. I mean, you can imagine a situation where someone attempts to do business in a sly way, maybe with a straw man or through another person in some other way. That's the kind of thing that independent monitor Barbara Jones and others are going to be keeping their eyes on. It's not something that someone's going to be able to play games with. At least in terms of the business licenses, those appear to be, and I'm reading from this, the cancellation appears to be no longer necessary. So it remains to be seen. The restructuring and potential dissolution of the LLCs shall be subject to individual review by the court-appointed independent director of compliance in consultation with retired Judge Jones. So to be continued on that issue.
Okay, Danny, NBC's Von Hilliard has been covering the former president. He joins me now outside his Mar-a-Lago home. Is there any word coming from the former president's camp?
Right. Donald Trump is here at Mar-a-Lago right now, Lester, as this decision from Judge Engoron comes down. And one of his attorneys in the case, Alina Habba, who you'll, of course, recall, not only spoke on Donald Trump's behalf inside of the courtroom, but also frequently came out to the courthouse steps following the 3-month trial to address reporters. She just issued a statement here in the last 2 minutes in which she says, in part, quote, "Given the grave stakes, we trust that the appellate division will overturn this egregious verdict and end this relentless persecution against my client." Now, Alina Habba said just in the last 2 hours that she and the legal team for Donald Trump intend to appeal this within the next 30 days. Of course, this was an investigation from Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, that began almost 4 years ago, March of 2019. And you'll recall this last November, at the beginning of this trial, that Donald Trump himself testified for more than 3.5 hours, Lester. At one point, the judge overseeing this case told the former president that his quasi-tangential answers led him to make, quote, negative inferences from his responses. Donald Trump was furious inside of that courtroom that day, calling this a scam prosecution. And upon Donald Trump leaving the stand that day, I asked his attorney, Alina Habba, whether she would intend to direct her client to have better control of his answers inside of that courtroom for fear of an outcome like this from the judge. And she told me that she would not represent a client and ever direct him or her what not to say. And for Donald Trump, he has made it clear every time he has had the opportunity to speak inside of the courtroom that he will speak exactly what is on his mind. And ultimately here with the judge's decision, this will have far-reaching implications if it holds through this appeals process, not only on him in the corporation's future, but also that of his children. And of course, at a time in which he is trying to hold on and win this Republican nomination, this is going to present an opportunity for not only his Republican opponent, Nikki Haley, but also Democrat Joe Biden to hone in on the judge's findings that he and his company over the years have repeatedly engaged in financial fraud, Lester.
All right, Von Hilliard in Palm Beach, thank you. For more, let's bring in Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker one more time. Kristen, would you expect this will be a big fundraising opportunity for Mr. Trump?
Absolutely, Lester. He has fundraised off of each of these key moments that have unfolded inside the courtroom. So this moment will be no different. And you just heard the statement there from his attorney, Alina Habba. I anticipate we will hear something similar from the former president on Truth Social. Vaughn hits at a really important point, which is what are we going to hear from his rivals? Nikki Haley has been out on the campaign trail trying to make the case that these legal challenges are nothing more than a weight around his neck, around the neck of all Republicans who are trying to win back the White House. So far, that has not resonated with primary voters. And Lester, according to our latest polling, 61% of voters do have concerns about Mr. Trump's multiple felony charges. Now, this is, of course, a civil case that we are talking about. But as Danny was talking about earlier, his first criminal case will go to court, that hush money case, next month. So how will that play out? We'll have to see.
Kristen, thank you. Let's go back to Danny Savalas. Danny, you've been going through this and noting some of the very pointed and sharp language the judge delivered in making this ruling.
As this case wore on, after the first few days in the fireworks with Donald Trump in court, this case went on. The trial was 44 days long. And during that time, the Trump team did call some expert witnesses, for example, to testify that these statements of financial condition were prepared according to general accounting principles, and they were therefore not that big a deal. So there was a possibility throughout this trial that Justice Engoron could have been persuaded. And, of course, he kept his own counsel, and we didn't know until this ruling came out. But this puts to bed any idea that Justice Engoron was persuaded towards the defense view of the case throughout this trial. It's pretty clear that Justice Engoron has some pretty harsh words, quoting the English poet Alexander Pope, saying, "To err is human, to forgive is divine." But Justice Engoron goes on to say that's not this situation. He says, and I quote, "The defendant's complete lack of contrition and remorse borders on pathological." And he closes with some more quotes saying the defendants are incapable of admitting the error of their ways. Instead, they adopt a, quote, "see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil" posture that the evidence belies. So for those of us that were wondering, had Justice Engoron kept an open mind? Was he maybe being persuaded by the expert witnesses called by the defense? I think the answer is pretty much a resounding no. I think he is consistent with the same tone he had in his original summary judgment opinion, which very much lambasted the defense, probably in even harsher tones. But this new opinion, same general tones of disbelief of the defendant's position.
Let me turn back to Laura in that same vein with some of the things you've been noting and highlighting with your pen there. What stands out?
Well, one of the things is there's a long discussion about Michael Cohen, the former president's former lawyer, former fixer. He was sort of described by the former president as a linchpin to this case. And given the fact that he has been an admitted perjurer, the former president wanted Michael Cohen to really be the heart of the state's case. They had disputed that. But the judge takes this on in an interesting way, saying that certainly Donald Trump essentially acted through a mob voice in directing Michael Cohen indirectly as opposed to directly, to falsely reverse engineer the financials, to make them look better so that the banks would lend them money. And it's interesting. He credits Michael Cohen's testimony, saying even though he admits that he did perjure himself in the past, this fact finder doesn't believe that pleading guilty to perjury means that you can never tell the truth. The judge saying here, Michael Cohen told the truth. Why is that important, Lester? Because next month, Donald Trump is going to trial here in New York City in a completely different case where Michael Cohen is going to figure very prominently.
So that'll be in front of a jury, however.
That will be in front of a jury.
The credibility test may be different.
It will, but it's interesting to at least see for this case, for this judge, he was able to find Cohen credible, even though he went through a lengthy cross-examination and a very tough one at that.
All right. I think Catherine Christian is standing by. Catherine?
Yeah, to follow up on Laura said, Michael Cohen is the main witness on the Manhattan DA's office case, which is going to trial at the end of March, on March 25th. And to have this judge basically say, just because he's a convicted perjurer, that does not mean he's telling the truth. He's telling the truth. So that is bringing smiles over at One Hogan Place, where the Manhattan DA's office is now, because they are going to have to make those same arguments to a jury, why the jury will have to believe Michael Cohen and why they should believe Michael Cohen.
Danny, let me ask you about this appeals process. Will the appeal be on the judgment here, the dollar amount and the remedy here, or will it be on the actual finding of liability?
It'll likely be on everything, a global appeal on all issues. And really, if you want to go through a bullet point list, it would probably be best found in the decision, the earlier decision by Justice Engoron on summary judgment, where Justice Engoron addressed a number of the defense's issues that they had raised and rejected almost all of them, if not all of them. And then, so in a case like this, it won't just be the legal issues or the conclusions that we read in this opinion, but it might be something that we're not even yet aware of, which might be evidence that came in that shouldn't have come in, although that's always an uphill battle on appeal. So there are any number of issues that the defense may raise, and of course they will attack not everything from the findings to the final judgment, the dollar amount, the findings of liability, even going back to summary judgment. Everything they can possibly raise, they will raise on appeal. In the meantime, back to Catherine's point, what do you think that the prosecution in the upcoming hush money case will be able to glean from this ruling? Quite a bit, to the extent they don't already know it. I mean, obviously, in any criminal case, the prosecution isn't going to reveal what they already know or show all their cards in advance of trial. But if, to the extent there's a finding about Michael Cohen, I do think the Manhattan DA's office will find that very interesting, because the Manhattan DA's office case against Trump is almost completely financial, and it relates very closely to some of the issues that are raised here, which is the internal business activities of Trump entities. And that includes people like Michael Cohen, who is a character in the New York AG's case against Trump, but a central figure in the Manhattan DA's criminal case against Trump based on the hush money payments made to an adult film star. So, of course, the Manhattan DA's office has been watching this closely the entire time. There's plenty in here for them to use. If they didn't already know it, which I expect they probably had a few hints, they would have had access to the same discovery tools as the Attorney General. But they are reading this with great interest right now as they look forward to a March trial date in this, which may be one of the first Trump criminal case to actually get to a jury trial. Laura, you've been digging through this, but there's a lot here. This could get ugly and messy.
It could. And I think for folks at home that might sort of be wondering, if the banks didn't complain and the banks were not the ones that brought this suit, instead it was the New York Attorney General's office bringing this on behalf of the people, on behalf of the state, where does all of this money go? And so the answer to that is it will go back to the state. The banks will not see a dime of this money. It's not as if Deutsche Bank is going to be made whole by this nearly over $300 million penalty we have here. This will go back to the state. It will go in a state fund. Obviously, it will be tied up in appeal for a long time. But just so folks at home understand, this is not money that is going back into the coffers of Deutsche Bank.
All right, let's go to Rahema Ellis. She's standing by outside Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan, and you're here to remind us that this case goes beyond Donald Trump. It's the organization and it's his family.
It really is. And since Donald Trump was president, and most recently his sons, Donald and Eric, his two adult sons, have been running the business. And the judge's decision makes a mark against them as well. Both Donald and Eric have been fined $4 million each and been banned for 2 years from doing business in the Trump enterprise. That strikes at the heart of what the Trump enterprise is all about. This building I'm standing in front of, this is the iconic image of Trump Towers, of the Trump enterprise. This building is the heart of what he is all about. This hits at his brand and at his children who have been running it, if you will. If they are banned from doing the business, and if Ivanka Trump, who has essentially stepped away from the enterprise business-wise and politically, the question becomes one of who will take over the running of the Trump business. That's a question that they've got to be asking, and other people are asking too, in as much as they've been forbidden, because there is a monitor watching everything, from selling off assets and moving assets around in order to make certain that they would not have to respond to any penalties that people thought were coming. So a big question now, Lester, is what does this family do in the interim if Donald Trump himself is banned and if his adult sons are banned from doing business in Trump Enterprise? What happens to Trump Enterprise at that moment?
All right, Rahema will ask you to stand by. Let me bring back Kristen Welker. Kristen, you talked about Donald Trump using his legal woes to his political advantage. We haven't seen the same thing necessarily from the Biden camp.
Well, that's right. And what's notable is that President Biden's walked a really fine line when it comes to talking about former President Trump's legal challenges. Reporters certainly have tried to get a number of reactions from him to all of these various developments. What he's been focused on, for example, Trump's recent comments about NATO, suggesting he would support Russia invading a NATO country, his stance on abortion, amid new reporting that Trump is mulling throwing his support potentially behind a 16-week ban that was first reported by the New York Times, now confirmed by NBC News. So strategically speaking, President Biden trying to stay out of the legal fray, particularly coming off of his own special counsel investigation. He was obviously cleared of mishandling classified documents. Now, notably, Lester, when you talk about the money, when it comes to this, the fundraising, think about this. Trump raised more than $2 million within a day of when his mugshot was released. And continuing with that thread, more than $27 million in Trump campaign fundraising went to legal costs in the last 6 months of 2023. So when you think about how this could impact Trump politically, could there start to be a backlash from this? It's hard to see his core supporters ever leaving him. But again, how could this play if he does make it to the general election? That's where it gets more complicated on the campaign trail, Lester.
All right, Kristen, thanks. Let me bring back NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos. Danny, the judge in his ruling, as you dig deep, really reflects on the history of the Trump organization, along with what was initially before him.
Yes, and because the judge, in a sense, was finding repeated and persistent fraud, as he had even as far back as his summary judgment decision, relevant to his honor is a recitation of the fact that this is not the first time this has happened. In other words, in formulating a punishment, it was relevant to the judge that this kind of thing had been going on for some time. For example, he goes into the history of corporate malfeasance. He discusses that in August 2013, the Office of the Attorney General, and I referenced this earlier, had sued Donald Trump, Trump Organization, and other entities in connection with the Trump University, I guess you would say, university that wasn't a university. So that goes back as far as 2013. Then in 2018, Office of the Attorney General sues Donald Trump, Trump Jr., Eric Trump, for persistent violations of law based on the Donald Trump Foundation. And then as back just recently, May 2022, Trump Organization enters into a settlement agreement with the AG for the District of Columbia, and that's arising out of allegations that the inaugural committee paid excessive fees to the old post office there. So, and then you go back to 2022, August, Alan Weisselberg, one of the parties here, pleaded guilty to 15 criminal counts of tax fraud. So very relevant to the judge here is that this has been going on for some time, at least over a decade. A little over a decade is the earliest date, the 2012 date. So that was very relevant to Justice Engoron in arriving at a dollar amount and the appropriate punishment. So this is a situation, much as it is in criminal sentencing, a criminal history is relevant in formulating a sentence. For Justice Engoron here, the history of bad behavior was relevant in arriving at a final punishment for these defendants in this civil case.
All right, Catherine Christian, let me turn back to you. Donald Trump, if I get this right, has really downplayed his day-to-day involvement in the Trump Organization. But the judge seemed to call out his credibility on that.
Yes, as you recall, he testified, Donald Trump. Actually, he testified twice. He testified about the gag order issue. But the judge specifically states that Mr. Trump frequently interjected long, irrelevant speeches on issues far beyond the scope of the trial. His refusal to answer questions directly severely compromised his credibility. So that's basically the judge saying Donald Trump was not credible. So he did not really credit his testimony. And that was put in the decision. It was the basis for the verdict. It was very important just to keep a record for when it goes to the appellate division, which will probably take 5 months to a year, and then on to the Court of Appeals. They will look at this decision and read the transcript and say, even Donald Trump was incredible with his testimony.
All right. And Laura, some of the ramifications of this are quite severe. Getting loans, for example.
Yeah, right. It's not just the bottom line number, but sort of the reputational harm that I think the Trump organization and the Trump business empire will now be felt as a part of this order. The judge says that he is banning Donald Trump and the Trump organization and its affiliates from applying for loans from any financial institution in New York for a period of 3 years. Now, the state, the attorney general, had wanted a lifetime ban on his ability to do business in the state of New York because of what she alleged was sort of the course of conduct that had gone on here. But what the judge here, Judge Gorin, is doing is saying you can't get a loan for 3 years. So even if he's not banning you for life from operating in the state of New York, if you don't have the ability to get a loan, that might effectively prevent you from your ability to conduct business, at least to the extent that he had been already. Now, of course, his real estate empire is not limited to the state of New York. This only concerns what's happening within the state's boundaries. It doesn't happen to affect what's going on in Florida or New Jersey, but still, it's a meaningful sanction.
All right, let me go back to Kristen Welker. Kristen, we were talking about fundraising off of this, and we've got some news on that.
Lo and behold, Lester, we just got our first fundraising email that has been sent out from the Trump team. It starts accusing this decision, this judge, of basically being behind a witch hunt, just as we were discussing, despite the fact that there's no evidence to support that. And he frames this entire thing as election interference in this fundraising email. And again, I just reiterate the point I just made, that he raised millions of dollars after his mugshot was released. This is a strategy that has been working for him in this Republican primary. We are a week away from the South Carolina primary, for example. He has only solidified support around him heading into South Carolina. He's leading Nikki Haley by some 30 points. Doesn't mean she can't turn this thing around, but boy, it sure is uphill for her, Lester, and hard to see how she would stop him, despite the fact that she makes the case that he should be disqualified because of this baggage. So far, hasn't had an impact.
And let's find out what the day-to-day impact will be. Let me go back to Danny Savalas. What's the practical impact as Donald Trump, goes about his day today? What has changed in his immediate existence?
Arguably very little, because they will almost certainly seek an immediate stay while they appeal this to the First Department, which is the Intermediate Appellate Court in New York State. And so during the pendency of that appeal, it may be the case that none of these will go into effect, including that no one will have to write a check. And it's not just Donald Trump that has to write a check. Alan Weisselberg, some of the other individuals named have been assessed with penalties themselves. I believe Alan Weisselberg, for example, was hit for a $1 million penalty. We're still reading through this. I don't know if Justice Gorin showed his work as to how he arrived at that number for each individual defendant, or by each human defendant as opposed to each corporate defendant. But in the very near future, very little is likely to change, except for the continued monitoring by retired Judge Barbara Jones in terms of compliance. Because one of the main central themes of the AG here is that this is an ongoing problem. And this came up several times in the course of trial. It's not something that happened in the distant past. This is something that keeps happening and needs to stop happening in the near future. So it'll be very interesting to see how the Trump organizations, or what is, the organizations formerly known as the organizations here, to the extent that they are currently canceled or that cancellation is paused, how they move forward and how they are monitored in terms of their ongoing behavior. Because this organization is a gigantic ship that you really don't just bring to a halt on a dime. It's an ongoing concern. It is a business that is active as we speak. So this is going to require quite a bit of monitoring in the near future.
All right. And you see the headline at the bottom of the screen there. Donald Trump ordered to pay $355 million in the civil case. Kristen Welker, some final thoughts.
Well, Lester, again, this is a gut punch to former President Trump. There is no doubt about that. They are going to appeal this decision, but it still hits him where it hurts. In his pocketbook, he has created his political career around himself as a businessman. So there's no doubt that this hurts, broadly speaking. But again, in the primary, it's hard to see it really having a dent. We will have to see if he does go on to win the nomination, and we'll have to see if some Republicans, some donors start to get frustrated by paying his legal bills. Again, he'll be in court next month for his first criminal case, Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker, thank you. Laura, your final thoughts.
Kristen makes a great point that this is happening within the backdrop of an avalanche of other legal woes. He, of course, has a first criminal trial slated to start next month here in New York, but he's also got a case in Washington, D.C., a case in Florida, a case in Georgia, multiple jurisdictions, multiple overlapping issues. But this one is about his business empire, the whole thing that propelled him to fame and the White House. This really hits home. And the judge really going to a point to talk about his behavior and his lack of remorse bordering almost on pathological, to use the judge's words, and why it was always sort of baffling why the former president attacked the judge who was going to be the one that was making this very decision. This was not a jury of his peers. This was a judge who he attacked again and again. We saw him in the hallway day after day, almost using his hallway stops as campaign stops. And so this now sort of setting the stage for what could come later on. Obviously, this is a civil case, not a criminal case, but this is what one judge has done. And we're now going to soon see what a jury will do.
All right, Laura Jarrett, thank you very much. That concludes this NBC News special report. We'll return some of you now to NBC News Daily. We'll have more coverage ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, and online at NBCnews.com. I'll see you tonight with more on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day, everyone. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.